Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate with host Glenn Sutherland.
Welcome to another episode of Canadian Investing in the U.S. This week, my guest is Chris Molenaar. Chris, let's start off by giving everyone a little bit of an introduction to yourself, what you do, and then we'll jump into it.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I am a real estate agent out of Saskatoon, Canada. So when we're talking about investing in the U.S., I actually do have business partners in the U.S. So my business expands, all across Canada. I've got real estate agent partners that work with me here at eXp Realty all across Canada and now into the United States as well. I actually grew up in British Columbia, Canada. I moved out to Saskatoon as a 19-year-old kid, or a 19-year-old young man, I guess you could say, and built my business literally from scratch. When I moved here, I had the clothes on my back and a $1,500 vehicle, which was quickly written off. I got in an accident, and I was, knocking on doors looking for a place to work, knocking on doors looking for a place to live. I had, no employable skills, and I also had no network at the time, and so I was fortunate enough to have some family. One I call a long lost family member. One of my cousins took me in for 6 months, and I come from a trades family. I'm non-mechanically inclined. I'm the black sheep of the family. I've got 5 siblings. I was the first of 5 to get my trades ticket, and I always say the first and only to get out so far yet, anyways, of the trades. But it was I had to learn everything the hard way, and so I always tell people that it's a gift and a curse that by the time I learn something, I learn it so well that I can teach it. That's the benefit, but obviously learning things the hard way isn't always so much fun. But the interesting part of my journey, my story, is when I met a girl here in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
It was one girl that brought me here, a different girl that keeps me here. So people say, "What are you doing in Saskatoon? You used to live in the mountains. It's beautiful there." I swear we had 4 months extra summer in BC, but I can't just say Saskatchewan women. That doesn't sound right, But so anyways, I was selling her on this dream because I was a second-year sheet metal. No, I was a first-year sheet metal worker when we met. So I was essentially just a laborer with no university education, renting room and board from in a house. Okay, paying my own way, which is kind of cool. Whatever, at 19, 20 years old. But she already had 2 degrees. She had her life together. She owned her own place. So I'm selling her on this dream. I can be whatever I want to be. And so she basically took me into the bookstore and said, "You need to buy a business book. I'm calling your bluff. Buy a business book. We're not leaving the store till you buy a business book." And I've been reading a book a week ever since then. And the book that I read was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
That was the first one you picked up.
It was either that book or something else written by Robert Kiyosaki, and it was Forward by Donald Trump. That's what sold me on the book. Now remember, this is 2008, 2009. Donald Trump was hardly at all speaking out about patriotism at that time.
Yeah,
he was only known as the guy off of that TV show kind of thing with the comb over, the business mogul, right? So that's kind of my short story. I got out of the trades, and now this is my 10th year in real estate. So
awesome. So we were talking, you said we were talking a little bit beforehand, and we were one of the topics that kind of triggered me is retirement, and I think it interests everybody. Some people think that real estate's the way to retire. Some people get into real estate and realize they still need to retire from real estate. Maybe we can go down that path a little bit, but the retirement path and how you see this kind of working out.
It's interesting. I call it the retirement philosophy, especially when, like in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he talks about if you want to increase your income, you got to learn sales and or leadership. And it really doesn't matter what you do for work. You could be a doctor. You need to learn leadership and business to own your own practice. And that applies literally to any technician related job. If you want to be an entrepreneur and you work for a big company, you still need to learn leadership in order to navigate your way up the ladder, so to speak, and increase your income. And no matter what, you need to learn sales so that you can sell your ideas, if nothing else. And so that's essentially what I did. But the funny thing is, when you're working by the hour for the man, so to speak, and you're making 50 grand a year, maybe 100 grand a year if you're doing well, and you're like, okay, I could retire on $1 million. But once you start making 250, 300, 500 a year, I don't know if I can retire on $1 million. That's only 2 years worth of income. And so that's why it's a philosophy, right? And then here's the other thing. Like, sure, in theory, your expenses should go down, but what we've learned with inflation is that they actually don't go down. They go up, especially when your health, like towards the end of life, your health expenses kind of go through the roof. And in theory, if we all knew when we were going to die, it wouldn't be such a concern as to where we spend our money, because it's kind of like, as long as we spend it before we're gone, our kids can go earn their own money. Forget it, right? Just kidding. But the truth of it is, it's like, I actually want to be making the same amount of money or more in retirement than I do on a regular day-to-day basis. So
at least
I don't want to, I don't want to retire on 50 grand a year or 30 grand a year. Like, that's not fun. So it's a philosophy. Plus, here's the other thing. The more successful you are in terms of your ability to retire early, the longer your money needs to last. And one thing I've determined recently is, in this market today, man, have we ever learned how quickly things can change. Look at Warren Buffett, what he did with his assets during COVID. He liquidated everything, and for the first time in his entire life, he had to start hiring people to find places to put his money. It's such a big shift, and you see what happened to the market in 2008 down in the US with, mortgages and housing and all kinds of stuff. And my biggest complaint right now is, living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, is that we don't see the fluctuations in pricing as you do, let's say, in Ontario, BC, and many other markets in the US, especially what we've seen since COVID. And so now I actually liquidated some of my rental properties because it's just not fast enough. I used to be able to do somewhere between 10 to 15 up to 20% if you're really doing well on like a rental property, single family rental. Just buying at reasonable market value, maybe a very slight discount, find a cash flow property with a suite or something in a good area, good tenants, and you'd pay down the mortgage, let's say 10 grand a year, whatever it is, a little bit of positive cash flow, very little appreciation, but you're like, you know what, 10, 15% return, that's pretty good, because annually inflation is 3%. I'm beating inflation. We're getting ahead. I'm happy.
A little higher now.
That's it. Inflation, like, think of it. If I think, okay, 2019 pricing versus pricing up today even has softened a little bit with the increase in interest rates. Well, first of all, those interest rates are starting to eat away at that mortgage paydown you used to have, which was the best, safest bet in a real estate investment. Okay. Now, I know we don't know what the future holds, but that's part of the problem. Right. And then now you look at, for example, what's inflation? What is the actual inflation rate? So all we know is gas prices and grocery prices have close to doubled in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
Real estate prices have gone up on average. I don't really want to put a blanket statement, but I've seen in many areas, I've seen 40% increase in prices. I've even seen 100% increase in prices in some areas.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm saying is, like, so if you buy a rental property in an area where the price has gone up 40%, great. That didn't happen here. So I'm like, I got to find something better. So I'm investing back in my business and generating more cash. But then the problem is, of course, again, where do you put it? And I think that's the ultimate concern right now when it comes to retirement. Number one, how do you want to live? When are you going to retire? What are you going to do with your time? That's a whole nother conversation. But also the question is, these days, where do you put your money? Like, here's a great question I love to ask people. It's a philosophy question based around retirement. So all of a sudden, $20 million falls into your lap. Where do you put it? Like, even as a real estate investor, even if you're one of those 0% down, all investor money for you type of real estate investors, okay, like we have out there, the working partner, so to speak. If you had $20 million instant access, where would you put it? I mean, sure, you'd start looking into commercial projects. But if it was your money, I mean, you'd be hard pressed, and
yeah, I agree.
Right. Which type of asset gives you everything you need? Are you going to put it all in one place? Are you going to put it all into a commercial development? And I mean, if it's not your expertise in your forte, a commercial development could go either way. Really, I mean, there's still a certain amount of expertise required, most definitely. Land development, it's, again, you better know your stuff. And the thing with land development is, I think it's one of the safest places to put it, but the difference between getting, let's say, a 20 to 40 to 100 to 300% return, whatever the number is, let's just say 100% return on a piece of development land.
Yep.
Well, but you could see that return over 2 years, 10 years,
wow, yeah,
or 100 years. So that's my point, right? It's like that. I really like that question. What would you do with the money? And then how much money do you need to retire? So it's like, well, if you want to live lavishly, if you have ambition, I mean, what is the number? So if you need money that you're going to withdraw on, and you don't want to, eat away at it, and you're going to earn X percent, well, like, what's the number? Like $5 to $10, $1 million isn't that much money anymore. $5 to $10 million is like, okay, it's very doable. You see people do that in rental properties, right? But the business is different today. But now, is it 10, 15, 20 million? And that's, in some sense, you think it's a lot of money, but really, if like you're in Ontario, how many single family rental properties, if there is such a thing in your area, I should say, if there is such a thing as cash flowing rental properties, how many would that be? Single family, rentals. I mean, you'd have to go to the suburbs and buy something for probably $500,000, right?
Something. That's why I invest in the US now.
Well, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And there is areas you can buy stuff for $100,000 in the US. Yeah.
So maybe like just to kind of like pinpoint this, like, so to kind of backwards reverse engineer this, if you am I way off base, but you got to try and figure out what you need to live off of, what you're doing, and then you just kind of reverse engineer it. And do you factor in cash flow? Because like you said, you had some rental properties. Do you just subtract that off? So say, let's just make up some random number. You needed $10,000 a month, but you had, $5,000 in cash flow from your rental properties. Would you just try to calculate the other 5,000, reverse engineer it to figure out how much you need as a bundle to draw off of? Is that where you're going with this? When I started investing in the US, I did it by myself and had to go through the growing pains of doing that. GlennSutherland.com/coaching. A 12-week coaching program done 1 hour per week over Zoom from the comfort of your own home. Classes are kept to 5 people to be able to answer everyone's questions. Shortcut the process. Make fewer mistakes. Curriculum available at GlennSutherland.com/coaching.
I guess if you're isolating real estate itself as an asset, I mean, there's when you look at finance in general, there's you've got your income statement, and then you've got your equity, your net worth, your balance sheet, right? Okay, so I feel like real estate as an investment does a really great job on the balance sheet, but it really doesn't do that well on the income statement. And unless you're a working partner that's constantly refinancing deals, there's a squeeze to be had there. Or if you're taking upfront fees to acquire commercial properties, something like that, and you're working that into your salary, or if you become one of those types of investors and you charge for coaching, then now you've got some cash flow. Or if you're in the commercial side and there's a business attached to some of your investments, now all of a sudden you have cash flow. So for me personally, the cash flow side, which is and then there's the stage, like depending how old you are, there's a stage of where you're at with your business and whatnot. And so right now I'm at the building stage, and I'm focusing heavily on my income statement, which is building the real estate brokerage side of things. So for me, and then, okay, so you get to the point where your machine, your money-making machine, your business, so to speak, right, is chucking out enough cash to where you got to put it somewhere. And that's where this conversation comes to, which is like, okay, well, now you have excess surplus. Okay. So because if you've built an asset, so to speak, a business, let's say, where it's chucking out enough cash that you could retire, the question becomes, how sustainable is that business long term? And like if you built it this year, next year, 5 years, you're like, well, good, cool. But like, I'm a young guy. Is this business model going to last me 30 years? There's a lot of unknowns there. Real estate itself, as much as it's slow and boring, it always has been slow and boring, but it's slower than ever and more boring than ever, considering there's lots of options out there now. It's still, I think, the best, safest place to put your money.
Okay.
But I guess the question is, I kind of feel like I kind of went off on a tangent here.
No, I love it.
But really, it's like, okay, so I think you need both. So you got to retire on cash flow. So if you retire on cash flow, then you're relying too heavily on your business asset, I believe. So so you can easily, quickly retire on cash flow as a relatively young person. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you've got to build up enough excess to where now the equity that you've built up is kind of like your backup plan. And so like if you've built up a business that chucks out enough cash for you to retire today, okay, and then on top of that, you've got enough excess that's built you a portfolio of assets that you could rely on wholehandedly, solely alone if the business falls, great. And then within that portfolio, you've got to put yourself into, a variety of different things. And again, there's you got to have some fun.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not big into crypto, but I'm like, I think there's a certain percentage of, you got to have some play money in there, right? I mean, I'm not a gambler by any means, but I think a little tiny bit off the top, you should play. You got to have fun too. So that's my 2 cents.
So I'm going to ask you a question then.
Yes.
This comes into you get handed the $20 million, right? Or you're going to say that. You're going to be putting a bunch into real estate. How much would it go into real estate? What would you say?
Honestly, I could say easily 70 to 80% of it, easily. Okay. But the problem with real estate is and especially because I do understand creative investing as a real estate investor too. So now I would be constantly looking for other investment working partners because I don't want to do all the work, and so a certain percentage of it would go towards money lending, because that's cash on cash with a actual stakeholder position. You've got leverage. You have a position on title, okay, and you're getting cash on cash, which is predictable. It's nothing's guaranteed, but you're like, I know if this guy doesn't make money, I'm still going to make money. I get paid before him. If you're doing a 50-50 venture, or something of that nature, when do I get paid? Cash on cash, you're like, I want to check every month. It gives me peace of mind, or whatever arrangement that you sort out. So I think a certain percentage of it, and then I might even find a business partner like a house flipper or a home builder or something somewhere in a market where I understand, and maybe even operate within. But then of course you've got to have your safe stuff, and single family rentals are management intensive. Multifamily rentals come with challenges too. I like mixed use, but they're harder to find. I like strip malls, but they're harder to find. But I do think that I'd have to find, you really wouldn't need that many good, solid, decent sized commercial projects, maybe some warehouses, something like this.
Yeah.
And but now 20 million, here's a question. Is 20 million enough to really play a big game in land development? I don't think so. I mean, if you're, I'm not talking about the guy who's turning every stone, who's a genius, who's like, look at this land is going to make me, I'm just talking about like, you play a bet on par. Okay. How many bets can you play on par in land development? Like, I mean, I'm not talking about the guy who studies this stuff every single day, because I know there's people with zero cash that study this stuff every single day in land development, and they know that this corner is a premium upcoming sector, and they take somebody's money and they do a 2-year rent to own with some person that owns this property, and all of a sudden, bingo, they create cash out of thin air. I'm not talking about that person. I'm just talking about, you buy a reasonable, a play that's on par based on reasonable market value, a slight discount maybe. Is 20 million enough to do all of what I said, plus have a really big play on the land development side? You
never know. Like you could always partner with somebody else who has some money. I'm assuming you're going to use some leverage on this. You're not going to go $20 million cash, right? But I guess that the financing is expensive on raw land.
Well, if you're doing, so that's another really great point. And I think the easiest answer for this is, so on the money lending side, it is cash, right? You are the lender, right? Yeah. But I agree there's some leverage to be had. And even if you want to play a safe bet, it depends on, like, again, the philosophy thing is, first of all, you have that much cash. So, I mean, why would you take too much risk? How much more do you need? So,
Yeah.
I mean, so now your loan to value, you're like, okay, when you're a working partner building your business up, you're doing everything zero down. Okay. And Grant Cardone, Robert Kiyosaki, those guys all say leverage it all, leverage it all. But it's like, well, depending on your threshold and depending what you're looking to do. But I'm like, even if you wanted to play a conservative bet, you could even go 50% loan to value and buy some pretty nice, sweet, juicy assets. But I think the best answer to this is, wherever you end up putting it, you've got to find good partners. So to me, it's a networking game. It still is. So you got to you get the 20 million, go fly somewhere nice, relax, have a few drinks, enjoy it on the beach, and then find a bunch of really, really good partners. And then the other fun part of this is, what do you do with the rest of the 20%? So I said that there's probably 5% play money, in there. And I think the other 15% is like, let's put some financial advisors to work. I don't want to give them all of it. I still believe in real estate primarily, but I still do think I want some financial advisors in my corner that are watching and doing things for me and helping me move money around and looking at my portfolio from a different perspective and those types of things. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I really like the conversation. It's if you don't have the conversation, you're never going to have the money.
Yeah. I've heard the other side of this argument too, is to try to first go and you leverage the heck out of everything. You're in a growth stage. You have to, right? There's no other option but to do that in order to get to where you need to go. And then some people will say, just keep that going, right? Because the best defense is offense. And then the other side is some people like, I want to have a safer, I want to level out this cash flow amount. And you could do that by deleveraging, right? You could do that by starting to invest in other people's portfolios. And it's an interesting topic, because there's so many ways to go with this.
Well,
but I found, one's the last thing, but when you're growing, you're doing a lot of work. Like, at least me, I'm an active partner.
Yes.
And I have seen and interviewed people who've got into the 60s and 65 marks, and they have no way of stopping because they have so much momentum and so many people relying on them that there isn't a stop. Good
point. And from the outside perspective looking, and it's never the same as when you're actually in it. And like 20 million is not even a lot of money when you get into it either. You start thinking of it, right? There's so many moving parts and pieces. And like what you just said, people are relying on you. And really, I mean, even if you think of 20 million in assets, like what we talked about before, that's not a lot. That's like, if you bought, let's just pretend, and I know this maybe wouldn't be the best investment strategy. Sure. But let's pretend you went to the suburbs in Ontario and you went 20 million bucks. Okay.
Yeah.
Divided by $500,000 a pop. That's only 40 properties.
Yep.
Like, sure, if you're doing $100,000, somewhere in the US, per house, that's a whole heck of a lot more. And if you go commercial, it's different.
Yeah.
But I was going to say one thing, the whole idea of taxes, like, and this is the interesting thing, because my business is starting to pick up momentum. And one of my recent conversations is, I'm already upset about the taxes that I'm going to pay. And so, like, the conversation I was having about cash flow versus equity, it's true, but then I think there's a point where it eclipses. So where all of a sudden your assets, you have so much in assets that as long as the cash flow covers the asset and or the debt safely within whatever level of comfort you have in how conservative you are, you have enough equity at any point to where it makes more sense to borrow from yourself or at a reasonable rate of whatever you can borrow against your asset, because the cash flow still covers whatever you would use. Yep. Like, if you're going to dip into your line of credit against one of your assets, the asset still covers that to where it makes more sense than paying tax. So the idea is, let's say I need, I don't know, XYZ, million bucks. I need $1 million for something, whether it's a new asset or whether it's, I want to go have fun, or whatever.
Your new sports car.
yeah, totally. I leverage against one of my assets and I don't have to pay tax because I'm leveraging against the asset. If I go make $1 million in business and positive cash flow in a business, I mean, you're going to be paying XYZ tax rate,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's another interesting part of this whole thing too is, but like the numbers, so you've got the numbers, but then you've got like, it always makes more sense on paper to leverage everything. Here's another good conversation for the average person. Okay. Should I pay off my mortgage or should I invest? And so now here's the problem. You are the tenant. You have to pay. If your mortgage is paid off, you don't have to pay. If your mortgage is not paid off, you have to pay. So now the question becomes, if you are leveraging against your house into an asset, does that asset chuck enough cash to safely and securely cover itself and replace the mortgage payment that you are now paying? And 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. Unless you are extremely savvy, but the general advice you'll even get from a financial advisor be like, you're losing millions of dollars. But wait a minute, what if I go broke because my temporary cash flow crisis becomes, sure, even let's pretend that you borrow against your house and it's 3%. And let's pretend that you're averaging 8% with a financial advisor. In theory, you're losing millions of dollars by paying off your mortgage.
Yeah.
Right? In theory. But that cash flow, if you put yourself in a tight cash flow position as the average person, you might not make it that far. And that 8% is long-term average. What if your 8% dips because you need to liquidate that 8% to put it on your mortgage? It's kind of like, it's a balancing act.
And then there's taxes as well, right? You can't write off the interest on your principal mortgage, but you could write it off on your rental property. So now there's all these extra variables to play out.
Yeah. House hacking makes the most sense, but the problem is, most of us are married. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good when you're starting, right? It's good when you're starting.
That's right.
Chris,
yeah.
Before we go talking about your business, you mentioned off the start books, right? Just quickly, what are some of your like favorite books, or what are you reading now? Because I love books as well. I love to. I'm not as many as you. I don't do one a week. I like to do one a month. But what are some of your favorites? Some that people like listening to like really need to make sure that they have put through themselves, right? Read from front to back.
Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So are we talking real estate investing, or are we talking business in general, philosophy, life in general?
Let's just do what your favorites are.
Oh man. I'll say, whenever I get asked this question, I always answer with one of the classic personal development books, like Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because it made a big impact on me. So it taught me how to communicate with people. But I want to answer this question a different way. Like, I started reading a book a week, and then it becomes analysis paralysis if you read too much and you don't do enough. So I also think that, and then too, there's a difference between finding a valuable book that you can study and reading it over and over again, and just reading, plethora of it. The idea is this: if you want to drill for oil and make money, drill one hole, small and deep, and as fast as you can. If you're drilling 100 holes 2 inches deep, you're never going to make any money. Right. So the idea is, if you can find one book that's going to make the difference for you, read that book over and over again every single week, as an example. And then the other thing that's changed too now is with the internet, it's like, especially with artificial intelligence now, it's like, man, information has never been more accessible. And like, you can go on ChatGPT and be like, please give me a book summary for How to Win Friends and Influence People. Please rewrite it in Swahili. Please break it down as if I was going to speak on it on a YouTube video. Please turn it into a blog post, and you can regurgitate it 1,000 times. And so, it's like, well, reading a book isn't what it used to be. It's still valuable, but it's like, unless you're embedding it into your subconscious for a certain purpose, if you're navigating and looking for information in bits and pieces, I don't know that it's the most productive way to spend time consuming content, if that makes sense.
So what would you say was the book that you've read the most times?
Right now I'm building my business in EXP. And so there's a couple of books that are all based around like leadership and recruiting.
Okay.
And one is GoPro by Eric Worre, and others is Building an Empire by Brian Carruthers. And it's all about multi-level marketing. Okay. Because EXP has a similar structure to that. Outside of that, I think for mindset related stuff, there's like Think and Grow Rich is one of the classics for sure. I've read that book several times.
Yeah, me too.
And there's probably another 10 books along those similar threads that I continue to go back to.
Yep.
And then there's books like what is that book on habits? James Clear.
Atomic Habits.
Atomic Habits. That's another one of those where
I've read that a few times too. It's so good.
It is, but it's a weird book in a sense where, like, when you read Think and Grow Rich, it's kind of that you study it, you apply it, you come back to it, you read it all the cover to cover, chapter at a time. Atomic Habits is different, where like you could read 3 pages and apply something and never read it again, and that could be one of the most powerful books you ever read. It's weird in that way.
Yeah, each time I get something different, completely different book.
Yeah, it totally is, and he's got a blog and all kinds of stuff too. It's powerful stuff, but. My general overall, this is something Jim Rohn said. He says, somebody dedicated their entire life's work into building this book, and they're offering it to you for $12 on any topic you could possibly think of. Take them up on that offer. Right? Yeah. And now you can regurgitate it on the internet, and spit it out in 2 seconds flat.
Yeah. Oh,
man. And now artificial intelligence, I'm telling you, man, that is a whole nother rabbit hole right now that is very exciting to see what happens. Exciting, but also doomsday, so it's a lot of fun though.
Okay. Chris, before I let you go, let's talk about your business, how people contact you. Let's go into that a little bit and then we'll wrap this up. Yeah.
I'll just say the easiest thing is, if you like the conversation today, feel free to look me up on Instagram or on YouTube to find out more about what I do. And so I'm building a real estate company, and I do work with a lot of real estate investors as well. I'm always looking to network with other real estate people. So my name's Chris Molenaar, and my last name's spelled Molenaar. So if you look me up on almost any social media platform, I recommend Instagram and YouTube. But this is definitely a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, right on. Thank you.